Hi, I'm Cynthia Phelps. You might have met me, but it's quite likely that you don't know my personal story. It was a year 2007, and I ended up in rehab. My story is not particularly unique. In fact, the World Health Organization says that about 140 million people worldwide have alcohol addiction. So I definitely wasn't unique, and actually my story wasn't that dramatic, or it was pretty typical. I went through a difficult divorce, and my drinking, which used to be fun, went into a dark area where really I was using it to cope, and I was not really interested in my life, so I was using it to try to get away as much as possible. One day I woke up, got ready to go to work, and went to the kitchen to get some breakfast, opened the refrigerator, and saw a bottle of Pinot Grigio and thought it would be a great idea to have a Pinot for breakfast. It's a light summer wine, right? But I knew enough to know at that point that things have gone completely off the rails. And so I grabbed my bottle of Pinot Grigio, and I sat down in front of my computer instead of going to work that day. And I found myself a rehab in town that I could go to. It was pretty interesting being in rehab. I was probably the most reluctant rehab participant that you could imagine for somebody who actually put themselves in rehab. I didn't have anyone else to blame, which would have been really useful at that time, but it was just me. And I think one of the most kind of pivotal times that I remember when I was in rehab, we were sitting there, and it was towards the end of the first week, and our attending physician walked in and introduced himself for the first time. And he went around the room and asked other people to go ahead and introduce themselves. And so I introduced myself. I can't even remember what I said at the time, but I remember he looked at me and wagged his finger at me, and he said, "One day you're going to work in addiction, and you're going to help a lot of people." And I remember that I probably looked something, like, no. That's the last thing that's going to happen to me. In fact, not only am I not going to work in addiction, nobody's even going to know that I was here. And I was dead serious about it at the time. And in fact, it took me about 3 weeks of rehab for them to wear me down and convince me to even tell my parents that I was there. I managed to do my best to get sober. I stayed sober for quite a while, and it helped. I did what they told me, and I got my life back together. Unfortunately, during this time, the university decided to not renew my contract. Kind of expected to a certain extent, since even though I was showing up for the last couple years, I was pretty checked out. But things were not bad. I had been doing some consulting work for the Veterans Administration at the time, working with their mental health professionals, helping veterans helping actually train their mental health professionals to help veterans. And I was really enjoying it. So I decided to incorporate as a company and step up my consulting work. During that time, I actually took a job for a short period of time here in San Antonio, where I was designing educational games to teach kids about physics. And those games were on the iPhone, and I was really captivated at the time with mobile devices and how they could help you essentially on a daily basis with different types of things. And at the same time, the Veterans Administration became interested in using mobile apps for veterans, and they came out with their first app to help veterans with PTSD. And so I started working with the Veterans Administration developing apps. And so I started working with the Veterans Administration developing mobile apps. And during this time, I had a dream. One night I woke up And in my sleep, I had actually been designing a mobile app to help addicts through the process of recovery. It was a pretty cool idea. I woke up, I remember I grabbed my phone, I took notes about what I wanted to do and what I was doing in my dream, and then I set it down and I went back to sleep. I went to sleep both literally and figuratively, because I wasn't really in a position to be able to develop a mobile app because I was still really struggling myself. You see, there was a lot of shame involved with being an alcoholic. And even though I had managed to get myself out of the thick of it, I was still trying to be normal. And so I was still trying to drink like a normal person. And it was really nothing normal at all about it, because I had to take ridiculous efforts. I couldn't keep any alcohol in my house. I had to plan my evenings, so I only had a couple drinks and then I needed to excuse myself. The whole thing was pretty torturous, and I wasn't willing to admit that I was an alcoholic. I didn't want to have that stigma. I didn't want to be perceived as damaged goods. Interestingly, about the same time, I ran across an article by Dr. Kristin Neff. She had been studying for the last 10 years a concept called self-compassion. I was pretty riveted by this idea, the fact that you can show compassion towards yourself. I was probably most excited about the idea because I actually had zero self-compassion myself. In fact, I was about as far as you could get from self-compassion. I was really more along the lines of self-loathing at the time. And as I read the words and studied more of her research, I realized this is it. This is the secret sauce of being able to deal with my shame, being able to deal with how I felt and move past it in a real recovery way. Right about the same time, I decided my company needed to take it to the next level, and I wanted to create products of my own and not just rely on solely contract work. And so I enrolled myself in a local boot camp, a small business boot camp. And in that camp, we spent 7 weeks every week getting together and honing our businesses. And part of the process was to really choose what your business was focused on. And I did all the work, and everything seemed to keep coming back to this idea that I was really interested in mental health, and I was also fascinated with mobile apps. And so at the time, I began to see that my future was probably developing mobile apps in mental health and wellness. And in fact, I was even willing to take the baby step and tell my campmates that I had this idea to develop an app to help people in recovery from alcohol. And part of the camp process was that you had to do a good job of niching your business or narrowing the focus. And so part of it was practicing an elevator pitch. And so I got my elevator pitch down pretty good. Hi, my name is Cynthia, and I develop mobile apps that help people with mental health and wellness. And so I had that down, and I started practicing it on folks at Geekdom. Geekdom was a co-working space that I had just joined, and it had a variety of other technology folks who were in startup companies and very like-minded. It was a great place for me to start this new venture. One of the things I did was I took my pitch and I started shopping it around to different people. And the first person I gave my pitch to looked at me and said, "Wow, that's really interesting. You know what you should do? You should develop an app for people who are alcoholics." And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much. Okay." And then the second time it happened, I was on an internet date. And I gave my little pitch to my internet date about what I did for a living. And he said, "Oh my gosh, that's such an interesting idea. Have you ever considered doing an app for alcoholics?" And I said, "Really? That's an interesting idea. I'll definitely consider that." Now, at this point, I think I need to stop and tell a little story about my childhood. Don't worry, it's not a traumatic story. I had a pretty excellent childhood. I was raised Presbyterian by my family, and we went to Sunday school on a pretty regular basis. And so I was fairly up on my, 8, 9-year-old Bible school literature. And I remember running across a woman one day in the church who essentially said something to the extent of, I really wish I could speak to God directly. It would be great if God could speak to me directly. And I remember very distinctly hearing that because I thought, well, I don't know if she's been to Sunday school, but from what I learned, when God talks to you, you end up doing some really crazy things, like wandering around in a desert for 40 years, or building a giant ship when nobody knows what you're doing and they're pointing and laughing. And so I thought, well, that sounds like a terrible idea. The last thing that I really want is to have any kind of direct communication like that. So you can imagine how I felt when I gave my little pitch to someone else, and it happened the third time. I kind of got chills, and I called my sister, and I did one of those accountability calls, and the call went something like this. Dude, I need to talk to you. Something happened, and I'm going to tell you this. You don't need to tell anybody else, but I feel like I need to be accountable on this. And I went through and I told her about what had happened in rehab, and I told her about the dream, and then I told her about, what happened with the people suggesting that I pursue an app to help alcoholics. And she was supportive and awesome, and I'm pretty sure I ended the call with another, you don't have to tell anybody this. Because at the time, I feel like I wasn't quite ready. So you can imagine what happened when it actually happened to me a fourth time. In fact, I think I felt the blood drain out of my head. And if I wasn't telling this story and this wasn't actually happening to me, I would be like, oh, you're telling a tall tale. There's no way. That's ridiculous. But, some people kind of live their lives listening to advice and taking lessons from the universe. And then there's some people who are stubborn. And that would be me. And so it actually happened a fifth time. And at that point, I was resigned. And I raised my fists up and said, fine, I'll do it. But it was hard because I really understood what that meant, what I was going to have to do to be able to do it. I wasn't going to be able to just read about self-compassion literature. I was going to have to apply it to myself, to deal with my own shame and my own anxiety about what I was and what I went through. And I was going to have to quit drinking. And I was going to have to get ready to be the representative of this company that developed this app. Essentially, a poster child for an app that helps people in recovery from alcoholism. But I listened finally, and it was really pretty fantastic. And first of the year, I quit drinking completely, and things started falling into place. I met Tex Morgan here at Geekdom, and he had just had a friend pass away from complications of alcoholism, as I did too over the last year. And he was excited about working on the app project. We took it to Angel Hack in Austin, and we ended up winning over $4,000 in prizes with our pitch. And that was really fantastic. I am working on an NIH proposal that I have an academic partner at Columbia who has experience in using text messages to help people change their behavior. And I also found an academic partner here in San Antonio that'll help us with the clinical studies. And so I'm really excited about the future, and I'm finally making it go forward. And now when people ask me about what I do for a living, I give them the same talk. Hi, my name is Cynthia Phelps. My company develops mobile apps to help you with mental health and wellness. But the cool part is that I'm not afraid to tell my real story.